Greetings, everyone, and thanks for coming. My name is Jens Hilke, and I'm a conservation biologist with Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. Welcome to Vermont's Ecology and Environment, Caring for Natural Resources in Your Community. This is a course we call NR2, and it's a 4-hour-long course in total, divided up into 3 sections. For the in-person component, we'll be doing activities in small groups and individually. For right now, we want to start with Module A, and this is the pre-work, and that's what we'll be doing on this webinar. So the overall training is geared towards people serving on town boards, conservation commissions, planning commissions, select boards, or planning departments, and it's focused on land use planning for natural resources. Funding for the project has come from the Northeastern Area State and Private Forestry Redesign Grant and from the U.S. Forest Service. The course was developed by Vermont Natural Resources Council in collaboration with the Agency of Natural Resources. And when we're done with the course, a certificate of completion will be available. Thanks again for coming, and please don't hesitate to jump in with any questions. Right now, we're going to get into Module A. That's about local planning and local data, and it's really going to get into some of these big picture concepts. From Natural Resources 1, a course that many of you have taken, we'll get into why community planning is important and how it connects to natural resources. We'll also talk about local data and local inventories. The in-person part of this course is divided into Module B and Module C. And in Module B, we're going to talk about the types of actions you can take, both non-regulatory and regulatory. And this section is going to focus on the tools that are available to you. In Module C will be the how-to section, where we get into more detail about how to get organized and take action. And this is going to include a lot of information about prioritizing these various natural resource information data sets, as well as public participation and communication. So in Natural Resources 1, we talked about how natural resources have changed over time, about the characteristics of different resources at different scales, and then we got in a little bit about community planning as the basis for all of this. So today, I want to start by talking briefly about local planning and how it connects to natural resources. Then I'll talk about mapping tools and data to help you identify why natural resources are present in your community. So let's start by talking a little bit about planning and the importance of planning. Let's begin with why we plan and what does planning in Vermont involve? To recap from Natural Resources 1, first of all, planning is a process where a town establishes its vision, what it wants the future to look like. The town plan includes policies and actions that will advance that vision. The policies and actions are the basis for local action, including bylaws and other actions like studies, inventories, etc. How does this connect to natural resources? Town plans are required to include a section on natural resources. Local planning for natural resources happens in a larger context. The state of Vermont has long-standing planning goals that seek to protect and restore natural resources, from working lands to water quality. It provides a framework for what the state values when it comes to its land and communities. This means communities are not being asked to do this planning in isolation. There's a bigger vision that guides the state. Planning can help a community make decisions about a range of topics. like what to spend limited town funds on and how to keep a place healthy, safe, and appealing. Town plans are comprehensive in order to figure out the balance that makes for a strong community. Through the planning process, a town can make decisions about the balance of private property rights and the other things that are important to a community and to the surrounding communities and land. Striking this balance is the work of the Planning Commission, and it does take work. The policies and other decisions that come from planning will ultimately inform what actions you'll take to protect and restore natural resources. Just to go back to an idea from NR1, planning is part of building community capital, fitting all of these factors together for a successful community. The planning process, along with ongoing communication and participation, which we'll talk about later, are part of building that community capital. There's another reason we're talking about planning, and that's because it helps you consider how your community's natural resources fit into the bigger picture, both in terms of local decisions and in terms of ecology. Local decisions matter because the cumulative impacts of change will impact resources beyond the parcels and the towns where the change happens. For example, one house on one parcel may not impact the town. A few houses in the woods might impact the town. Maybe it washes out the road downhill, but not to the next town. But over time, a whole pattern of clearing for development, roads and power lines in the woods, could hurt wildlife corridors, or it could make flooding worse downstream since water would move off the hills faster. Planning is also important because many resources, like watersheds, forests, and wildlife connectivity corridors, require regional coordination to remain healthy over the long term. Understanding how local resources fit into the regional picture is an important first step toward cooperation across. So as you're considering how to take action, I just want to share a few additional why you should take action. Healthy natural resources can contribute to a town's environmental well-being, but also contribute to its economy and a sense of place. Let me just give you a few examples. Harvest and manufacturing of forest products accounts for $1.4 billion annually, and forest product manufacturing accounts for 8% of the state's manufacturing. Annual spending on tourism is about $1.4 billion, with about one-third of that as foliage tourism. And annually, people spend about $704 million on fish and wildlife-based recreation. Also, don't underestimate rural character and keeping Vermont special for future generations. For many people, these intangible values are just as important as economic and environmental reasons. So it's clear that natural resource planning has many benefits. Keeping natural resources healthy helps us all deal with climate change and other changes more successfully. For example, in NR1, you learned about how keeping habitat blocks and wildlife corridors connected and available for use is a strategy for ecosystem-wide resilience. Wildlife adapt by moving, so an important way to support them is to have interconnected land and water that animals can use to meet their day-to-day needs. The more connected lands and waters we give them, the better. This is what I mean by ecosystem resilience. Another one is avoided costs. Keeping natural resources intact may also help save money. That's the value of avoided costs. So, for example, when healthy forests help absorb rainwater and lessen the impact of floods, or when a larger culvert allows floodwater to pass without damaging the road as much, we've avoided infrastructure costs that the town would have otherwise had to pay. Another type of avoided cost are health costs. Fewer floods means people that are safer, more trees help absorb heat and improve the air quality. Let me give you an example of how the town of Bennington helped prevent floods, which saved money and protected businesses. So first of all, about the community. Bennington is a town in southern Vermont with a population of about 15,700. It's the sixth largest municipality in the state and has the largest population in southern Vermont. The town wanted to ensure that its downtown would be safe and economically viable. This was a concern because over time, Bennington experienced frequent floods costing millions in damage and reconstruction costs. They determined that traditional methods to control the river, like building berms and straightening the river channel, weren't working. So, how they did it. The project was led by town officials, who started with a public process with the help of a consultant. There was an agreement that this was important to work on, which was an important first step. Then, the town identified areas of economic activity that could be impacted by a flood and analyzed the flood risks. Then, they looked at changes that could reduce or eliminate risks to these key areas, especially ways to slow the river down during floods. Then they adopted zoning that prohibited new buildings in the flood zone, then worked to restore the floodplain, which gave the river space to slow down during floods. What did this project accomplish? By prohibiting development in the floodplain, Bennington was able to access increased funding for the floodplain restoration work. Tropical Storm Irene hit Vermont after these efforts had been completed. Bennington's floodplain restoration efforts slowed down the Roaring Branch's water enough that Bennington's Park Street Bridge and downtown were saved from flood damage. The project cost about $725,000, but the town of Bennington estimated that they avoided $93 million in costs from damage because of this, including about $62.4 million in private property damage, $28.3 million in bridges, and $420,000 in water and sewer infrastructure tied to bridges, as well as about $1.6 million for road repaving, just to name a few. So here are a few takeaways from the project that might help you if you're considering something similar. Upfront investment can save money later. Starting with a public process and discussing co-benefits like safety, economic development, and saving money can help build support. Lastly, the combination of prohibiting development in the floodplain and restoring the river was important. Either on its own would not have been enough. So that first section that we just finished was an overview of community planning and how it can help protect natural resources. Next, here in section 2, we're going to talk about how to locate and understand what natural resources there are in your community. We're going to talk about data sources and resources available to help with data collection, and then we'll look at some examples of how different communities approached data collection. Looking at natural resources in your town, and then also looking at how they connect to the surrounding towns, is a way to understand how the puzzle pieces fit together on the land. Let's take this example from West Windsor. The map you see on screen is habitat blocks. Basically, these are large forest blocks. The lighter yellow color show smaller forest blocks, and the darker color show larger blocks. When we look just within West Windsor, you see that there's a big block of forest in the southeast, but the forest is pretty fragmented elsewhere. It seems like the only important pieces in town are in that southeast corner. But when you zoom out, you can see what's happening around West Windsor. There are some big blocks in the Green Mountains, and if you follow the darker orange over to the Connecticut River, you can see a path of connected habitat. When you look at it this way, you can see that the patch in the southeast of West Windsor plays an important role in the big picture, even if that little corner itself doesn't seem all that important. Reading has recognized the importance of a similar type of area and has done some planning around that. So this just really shows that the choices of an individual town or individual towns can add up to something bigger, to a more healthy landscape. I want to start by highlighting the ANR's Natural Resource Atlas. This is really one of the most important tools you can use to find inventory information about your town. The Atlas is a web-based mapping tool. You can use it online without any special mapping software. The Atlas provides information about features on the ground like wetlands, agricultural soils, and geologic features. You can use it to get an idea of what's going on your land. Then you can zoom out and see what's present in your town. And then you can zoom out and see what's present in the region or even at the statewide scale. At the parcel scale, it's useful for getting a sense of what's on a site or flagging potential issues. But you can't regulate based on this. The exact place the lines are drawn may have changed, so the map is not something that gives you the boundaries, the exact boundaries for regulation. At the town level, the Atlas helps you learn about the diversity of resources in your town and shows how resources connect beyond your town. So the Atlas is a really important tool for getting a sense of what's going on at a variety of different scales. There are other data sources available to you. The first one I'd like to mention is called BioFinder. It's another web-based mapping tool. It identifies the lands and waters that contribute to Vermont's biological diversity. Stay tuned for updates to BioFinder. They're going to make it even more helpful by helping you prioritize different areas for conservation planning. Well, so what's an example of when you might use BioFinder? Here's one. If you're trying to determine which areas in your town were most important for wildlife movement, not just across roads, but across towns, you could use BioFinder to get a sense of how these pieces fit into that larger context. BioFinder and the Natural Resource Atlas both give you a general idea of what exists in your area. They're good places to get a snapshot as you begin inventorying and doing conservation planning work. They can also help you figure out what additional information you may need to collect. There are other data sources available to help you understand what's in your town and how it connects to the surrounding area. There's a handout in your packet that summarizes these, and there are a variety of them available. Having town-level data gives you more specific information to use when deciding the best ways to protect local natural resources. Town-specific data is also helpful because the forests, wildlife, and rivers on a local map are recognizable as part of the places residents are familiar with, instead of just vague concepts. Making this relevant can help build understanding and motivate action. It's a tool for education. Local data really can help connect people to the town resources and to making good decisions. The type of local inventory you undertake is going to depend on two things. First, what you want to accomplish, and second, how much time and money you have. There are a few different approaches that you can take that we'll discuss. First of all, citizen science. That's where the local citizens collect the data, either from existing data sources or from fieldwork. For example, water quality testing or roadside wildlife tracking. And citizen science is great because it helps townspeople understand the issue and understand the importance of the issue. It really gets that community buy-in because there's so much community investment in collecting the data. Professional inventories are helpful when consistent professional level data is needed. I'd want this if for things like investing in a regulatory process, updating a local zoning code, or looking to maps for the town plan. Professional inventories are done by ecologists who do a combination of mapping and site visits and often provide a report at the end. The third option, desktop survey, usually involves using available data like the Natural Resource Atlas or BioFinder, and there's often some sort of site verification component. Whatever method you use, you need to understand that inventory is an ongoing process. Things change, so these inventories are just a snapshot in time. You're never really done with this step of inventory. These locally generated inventories, they're not required for town plan updates, but they can be included in a town plan, and they're an important part of a broader natural resource plan. So let's compare these types of inventories in a little bit more detail. Let's start with citizen science. So the benefit here is that it can be a hands-on, fun way to get community members interested in their community assets, and it can get you some very specific data. A downside is that the data quality can vary, and it can be challenging to cover a whole town systematically. It can take a long time, sometimes several field seasons before you get enough data to be sure it's high quality. And all during that time, you have to manage and keep excited and invested a large group of volunteers. Furthermore, it can be hard to know exactly what the data means once you've collected it. Even if community members can collect the data, it can still be helpful to have a professional to help interpret it, though the meaning of the data might be clearer since people in the town help create it. All right. Now, professional inventories. The benefit here is that you get detailed information, sometimes including what's on private land, with the landowner's permission, of course. The downside is obviously the cost, and that it still may require some translation because the reports are often written in a scientific language that doesn't always connect the dots between what you have in your town and what you should do about it. It's important to understand that there are still gaps in information. We mentioned that an inventory is an ongoing process. Things change, so inventories are just a snapshot in time. This is one reason that even when you have a local inventory, this is typically not enough info to figure out, for example, exactly where on a parcel you should and shouldn't build. When it comes to reviewing how development could impact natural resources, it's usually necessary to do a site visit to confirm what's actually there. But the inventory provides the heads up that something's likely to be. Let me just give you some examples of how different types of inventory have been used in different communities. In Salisbury, the Conservation Commission led a multi-year citizen science project doing wildlife road tracking on different road segments in town, looking for where wildlife crossed. They took this information about where wildlife was crossing. They made maps from it that eventually ended up in the town plan, on the town website, and did a variety of workshops and videos. The project generated a significant amount of investment and did have some specific results. In Burke, the Planning Commission asked the Regional Planning Commission and the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department to help them with a desktop survey about some of the natural resources in their town. They were concerned about ski area development and about protecting wildlife and about their aesthetic, their view sheds. And this information eventually worked its way into a natural resource overlay district, part of the zoning code. In Plainfield, the Conservation and Planning Commissions hired a professional ecologist to do a natural community map of the whole town. This Plainfield ecological inventory helped inform changes to the town plan language and to zoning. So 3 different communities, each took a different course in inventory, and all 3 led to collecting local data is just the first step. Deciding what you need, choosing a type of survey, and then collecting the data is just the first step of the inventory process. After you have the information, it needs to be interpreted and prioritized, and you need to figure out how to integrate that work into your planning, into your projects, and into your regulations. Interpretation of data means figuring out what it means that you have a wildlife crossing here or a class 3 wetland there. So it's not just that it's there, but how it connects to other things. Prioritizing is important because it's the way you decide what resources need management or planning attention. We'll talk a lot about prioritizing more in Module C. A natural resource professional can help you with this. It's often a very tricky step. And just as important is integrating the information into your local planning. For example, using it to prioritize areas of your town for conservation or education or development. Good data can support the development and application of your regulations. There's a handout in your packet that involves some of the groups who can help, such as the Regional Planning Commissions, the Agency of Natural Resources, and others.
Welcome to Backyard Sugaring. This is Mark Isselhart, Maple Specialist, UVM Extension, based out of the Proctor Maple Research Center.
And I am George Cook, UVM
At this point, let's pause and just do a recap of what we've gotten out of Module A.
This program.
First of all, planning helps communities shape their futures and figure out how the community can balance these competing priorities.
So
most land use decisions are made locally, so there's a real chance to contribute to a healthier regional landscape. Having details about your local resources makes it easier to choose actions that are a good fit for the resource and for your community, and that there are people here who can help you with this. The last point, the process of taking stock can be a way to help build understanding in your community about local resources and why they matter.
Lots of extra questions, I'm sure, and feel free to contact George or I at our locations if you have more questions or seek out more information that we've provided at the end to help answer your questions. Well, the first thing you need is to identify which trees to tap. And in Vermont, we really focus on 2 species, the sugar maple and the red maple. They have similar traits. They're maples, so they have opposite budding orientation. The twigs are slightly different. Sugar maple will have